30th, 2002, Biography, with guest host Al Michaels.
Their accomplishments remain in our mind's eye years later. NFL Greats Week continues with Walter Payton. He took whatever life handed him and ran with it. Hi, I'm Al Michaels. From humble beginnings to the Hall of Fame, Walter Payton gave his all on the field and off. His record-setting career with the Chicago Bears provided some of the game's greatest moments. But the man friends knew simply as sweetness just wanted to be a regular guy.
On a perfect autumn Sunday in 1999, the National Football League paused to mourn the passing of one of its legends.
Ladies and gentlemen, before today's kickoff here at Lambeau Field and throughout the National Football League, we're going to honor Walter Payton's passing with a moment of silence. So please stand to honor number 34 of the Chicago Bears, Walter Payton.
He played the game like a warrior. He played it hard all the time. He asked no quarter, he gave no quarter. He was a great example of what a professional athlete should be on and off the football field.
For 13 seasons, Walter Payton played football for the Chicago Bears. By the time he was through, he had driven himself to redefine how players prepare, how role models are judged, and how legends are remembered. Walter Jerry Payton was born in Columbia, Mississippi on July 25, 1954, the youngest of 3 children.
What can I say about Columbia? I guess it was home. It was a small town and everybody knew everybody. It was a close-knit town and you just felt safe.
We were at the lower end of the economic spectrum when we were coming up. So we never knew that what we didn't have because we appreciate what we did have.
The Payton home was strict but loving. Edward and Aileen Payton sought to instill a strong work ethic in their 3 children.
I knew if they could grow up and get a good education, they could do anything that they wanted to.
We only had one rule in our family, do what you were told and do it well. And anything that we started, we couldn't quit until we finished.
But the only thing you had to do it right or you had to redo it. And then when you redo it, you got a whipping and then you had to redo it again. So after about 1 or 2 times, you tend to get it right.
At the segregated Jefferson School, Walter was overshadowed by his popular brother, Eddie, who excelled on the football field.
Walter was more introvert. He was a little bit quieter. I guess you can call him a quiet storm. So it took a lot to rile him.
Walter found joy in athletics, but while he played semi-pro baseball as a teenager, he shied away from organized football.
He never seemed interested in football, showed no interest in football. Even when Eddie would try to get him to come out and play, he would play maybe a little bit with him, but not much. I didn't encourage him, and his daddy didn't encourage him. So finally, Coach Boston talked him into it.
He's in the band and playing drums. I think that was his instrument. I really think he would have played anyway, but I don't think he wanted to compete against his brother, Eddie.
Eddie probably got all the attention, and he was this star athlete, and Walter was, this musician or whatever, and so I think he felt he had big shoes to fill.
They didn't get along too well together. I guess I can say that, but they were kind of rivals. I used to take them fishing, and they'd compete against each other, to see who would catch the most fish. But I'm not sure why.
There was always a rivalry, but it was a competitive, friendly rivalry that when we finished, we could always sit down and say what we did to get to that point. He knew, without a doubt, who was the best athlete in the family, so he learned a lot.
In Walter's senior year of 1970, Columbia's black and white high schools were integrated into a unified Columbia High. Walter played baseball and basketball, but made his greatest impact on the football field. And while some black athletes of the day were making political statements, all Walter Payton cared about was making touchdowns.
We put those groups together. We didn't have any problems. The first ball game was Prentice. This night, Walter broke 2 runs. One was 95 yards, the other 65 yards. After this ball game, we were walking off the field, and a parent came up to me and said, asked me what was I going to do about Walter giving the black power signal. You know, what black power signal? Well, Walter did get out when he'd get, you know, he knew he was gone. He did something like this. You know, I'm gone, you know. But the parent thought he did this, you know.
Walter had established himself as the top high school athlete in Mississippi, but he drew little interest from most southern universities.
The larger white schools, or historically all white schools, shied away from him because they didn't know if they were ready for integration. But schools like Kansas and Nebraska came calling, and Walter had agreed to go to Kansas on a football scholarship.
But Payton never made it to Lawrence, Kansas, opting instead for a more local alternative.
He came to Jackson to catch a plane to fly to Kansas to enroll. He had a layover. He came by campus to watch us practice. It was at the end of our practice. He came by the dorm to sit down. He said, "Man, I ain't sure I want to go that far away from home." I said, "Well, just put your stuff in here. I'll talk to Coach here. We don't have a problem."
In 1971, Walter Payton joined his brother in the Jackson State backfield. He soon found that the competition in the Southwestern Athletic Conference equaled any in the country.
All the great black athletes that are now playing at, you know, all the historically white universities had nowhere else to play in the 60s and early 70s but historically black colleges.
The team was coached by Jackson State alum Robert Hill.
Bob Hill is the ultimate father figure. He's a cross between Father Flanagan, Frank Cush, and Attila the Hun. He would pat you on the back, hold you close to him, and kick you in the butt at the same time.
Hill's tough persona transformed Walter from a finesse runner to a more complete back.
Bob was a fullback, and Bob's philosophy about being a fullback is you deliver the blow. You become the aggressor. You attack. You don't absorb. Never die easy.
Under Hill's guidance, Walter became one of the top collegiate backs in America. Hill's influence extended beyond the field as well.
Bob Hill was dating my mom's sister, and Bob and I had met on several occasions, and he thought it was a good idea for Walter and I to meet. And I've always been sort of like a no-nonsense type of person. And I think he felt that Walter needed somebody that could sort of balance him out.
I guess there is always in life your match and your life partner. And I think Connie was that for Walter.
While Walter had found happiness off the field, he was frustrated that his on-field accomplishments at Jackson State went unrecognized. Coming from a small black university, Payton gained little notoriety.
Walter obviously was the best athlete in 1975 in college football. He didn't win the Heisman Trophy that he should have. Well, he was obviously disappointed, but I think it served to motivate him. And he said, okay, I got another opportunity. I'm going to go show them at the next level.
Walter Payton would soon get his chance, taking his tough physical style to the rugged city of Chicago, set to embark on a career in the National Football League. Despite a record-setting resume from Jackson State, Walter was still not a household name.
Chicago Bears, first-round selection. Walter Payton, P-A-Y-T-O-N, running back, Jackson State.
Walter headed to Chicago while Connie continued her studies at Jackson State. The couple was forced to adjust to a long-distance relationship and a much colder climate.
I had never visited Chicago. I didn't know anything about it. I only knew what I'd heard, and most of the things I heard were not good. So I wasn't quite happy. But hey, he was happy. He was a first-round draft choice. I think everybody knew that Walter was headed for great things.
But the Bears Walter joined were hardly great, a mere shell of the famed monsters of the Midway.
The Bears were about at the low ebb, and we're kind of losing that, you know, that old, the sense of the black and blue Bears. And Walter came along at just the right time.
I thought I was going to Chicago to become the starting running back, right? Little did I know that they drafted this kid out of Jackson State named Payton. Just after about one practice watching him, I said, I'm destined to be a special teams captain this season.
Payton's small college background made some fans wonder if taking the young back was a mistake. Those fears were heightened by Walter's first pro game, when the Baltimore Colts rudely welcomed Payton to the NFL, holding him to 0 yards on 8 carries.
After the game, and when it came time, I was walking out of the stadium. My wife was with me, and he was walking along right next to us, and he had tears running down his cheeks. I think just out of instinct, she reached out and put her hand on his arm, and she said, "Don't worry, it's going to be better."
The pressure to perform began to affect Walter's health.
Well, they say he seems to experience shortness of breath, and I don't know what all. I think his agent even had to go up and...
At times, it really gets to me. And like earlier this season, during our preseason, I don't know what it was, but the doctor said I was just too nervous and too tense about, the upcoming season, to my dizzy spells and all. And it kind of eats me up inside. It's a personal thing with myself.
So I think he had some adjustment problems in Chicago when he first got there.
Yeah, I think he felt lost. I hope he felt lost. He was a young guy. I think he had just turned 21. And so he was thrust into this big NFL environment, really not much support group at all. I mean, I don't know who he had around him then.
I moved up there with him and helped him get in his apartment and stayed with him.
I think he was a little homesick and didn't seem to like to be alone. So his mother and I would try to come to as many games as we could, and she would come up and she would cook for him and freeze the food and, do all those motherly things that she would do.
Payton rebounded in 1975 to lead the Bears in both rushing and kick returns. But his tenacity and dedication to the game were tested when an injury threatened to keep him out of action.
Prior to the game with the Pittsburgh Steelers in 1975, Walter had sort of a sore, tender ankle, and I know that they had tried to inject it with some cortisone, and he didn't want any part of that. We had a senior member of our team, a guy named Sid Edwards, was brought in from the San Diego Chargers, sort of like to be the patriarch of the team, and Sid took Walter aside and said, "Hey, listen, we're going to play against Mean Joe Green and Jack Lambert and Andy Russell. This is the steel curtain. Walter, I don't think you want to play today. Just take it easy on you. You got a great career ahead of you. Forget about playing against the Steelers. Let Adamley play. We're going to get killed anyway."
Despite the urging of teammates, Payton planned on playing.
But they had a rule, which apparently he claims he didn't know about, that if you didn't practice either on Friday or Saturday, whatever it was, you couldn't play on Sunday. And that's his claim. That's the story he's sticking with. He had to sit out, and he actually wept. To this day, I know that he took to the grave a resentment that he had to miss one game. I think that for the rest of his career, Walter Payton could have had Jack Youngblood in his broken leg. I think Walter Payton could have had a compound fracture, and he would have played in a game.
It would be the only game Walter missed in a 13-year career. Off the field, Bob Hill's hunch proved correct. Connie and Walter were married on the eve of Walter's second season. During that 1976 campaign, Payton became a fan favorite and earned a nickname that would define him.
I will never get over the irony and the beautiful, bizarre symmetry of his nickname, Sweetness. There's nothing sweet about getting formed in the head. There's nothing sweet about these guys that came up and tried to tackle him and found themselves out cold on the carpet, and there he is 30 yards away. And yet, Sweetness was perfect, because something ultimately about Walter Payton was just plain sweet.
Sweeter still was a breakout performance in 1977 against the rugged Minnesota Vikings.
Well, the Vikings were not the easiest team to run against, but it was just one of those days when everything was right to run the football. You could just kind of sense that it was going to be a really special day.
Amazingly, Payton set a single-game rushing record while fighting a case of the flu. He would be named the NFL's most valuable player in 1977. In just 3 seasons, Walter Payton had become a superstar.
It's been said by many people, God decided to make a halfback. He made Walter Payton.
He was a guy who could fake you, could run by you, could run over you.
Walter could throw the ball. Walter could punt the ball. He could kick the ball. Walter could take a basketball and dunk it. Walter could take a football and dunk it over the goalpost. And that goalpost was pretty high.
Mentally, you just had to go in there and say, I have to make the best possible tackle I can. I have to grab onto anything I possibly can and avoid the stiff arm. And you can give him the hardest hit you could possibly give him, and he just backs off from it, and he keeps on running.
People don't realize how hard he worked to make himself better. Everything he did was geared to becoming a better football player.
I mean, he just worked hard. I mean, he worked hard. He just ran hard. During the off season, we wouldn't see Walter up at Hallis Hall lifting weights and running. Walter had his own program.
The Russians had some of the greatest sprinters in the world in the late 70s. And we were doing research on why. And we started studying their training methods. They were running up and downhill. And we figured, I mean, if the best athletes in the world are doing it to develop speed, it has to work for a country football player like us.
Payton soon found the perfect incline at a local landfill site.
The first time we found it, we had just got through working out. I forgot what type of workout we were doing, but we ran that hill twice. And our butts was dead, you know, because we had worked out prior. And to show you the level of conditioning and how it progressed, we went from running, you know, 2 to running 25.
Running on a landfill provided the Spartan setting Payton desired. When NFL Films asked to document the unique training methods, their cameramen were shocked by the grueling regimen.
From the top, I'm sitting there watching this guy, and the neat thing about it was when you were looking down, you could see his feet. They go into the dirt, but then they slip back, and that's what it was. And the angle, I never thought that the photography really showed the degree, the angle. I mean, it was insane.
Walter would love to take guys out on the hill and then come back and talk about them, how they couldn't finish and how they puked out, and the hill was a grueling test.
We all have a certain level that we want to reach to, and I think that his bar was probably set a lot higher.
You're watching a week he would rest, recover, maybe he'd do some walk-through stuff, maybe he'd jog a little bit, he wouldn't talk to anybody, wouldn't take a shot, he wouldn't do a damn thing about it, and he would just suit up on Sunday and you'd never know.
You could always tell when he was a little nicked up because he'd be a little cranky. And the main thing is you'd ask him, say, how you feeling? He says, don't worry about how I'm feeling, how are you doing? And that was always his thing, you know, look, I'm going to take care of myself, I'm going to be ready to go. You just make sure that you're ready to go.
Rather than lashing out, Payton often withdrew, creating an icy, silent shell that could last from one day to an entire week.
He never blamed anybody for our lack of success. All he did was try to work harder himself.
I mean, sure, he was breaking, you know, records every year and being the leading rusher after every season, but you had all these losing seasons, so he might have accomplished his goals, his personal goals, but as team goals, gosh, he was far from accomplishing that.
But he wouldn't just flat out say, we got to get this position, we've got to do this. He didn't become a clubhouse lawyer. He probably could have divided the team horribly. The very fact that the guy showed up game after game after game after game without missing a start tells you just about all you need to know.
Laughter helped Payton deal with the losing seasons. He used intricate practical jokes to keep the Bears loose, and among his teammates, Payton's pranks became legendary.
He had it down almost to a science. You know, you can leave a cigarette burning, and it'll burn all the way down to the butt if you just leave it alone. Well, he would tape M80 to this cigarette before practice, go out there and put it in the practice field somewhere. Nobody knew where it was. And we'd be all practicing it, and all of a sudden the cigarette would burn down and hit that fuse. Boom! Well, we'd all run for cover. And he'd just be sitting there laughing, his little laugh.
Payton was dealt a tragic blow in 1979 when his father, Edward, died suddenly of a brain aneurysm. Police officers in Colombia witnessed Mr. Payton driving erratically and arrested him for drunk driving. Edward died alone in his cell later that day. That the incident occurred in his hometown angered Payton, but the private tailback refused to be drawn into a public debate on the issue.
He didn't do as much as he wanted to do about the matter. He really wanted to go public and say some things about the way his father was treated in that town, and he thought his father was treated very unfairly.
He wasn't just flat out blaming the police, he wasn't flat out blaming society, but boy, there was a sublimated anger there.
Payton refused to publicly blame the arresting officers, but privately seethed about how his father's death was handled. Amidst this, Payton was considering an early retirement.
On occasion, that topic would come up, and he would say, you know, I want to leave on top, and I don't want to be battered up and banged up, and I want to be able to walk so I can play with my kids and my grandkids someday.
While his father's death and team's mediocrity haunted Payton, the hiring of Hall of Famer Mike Ditka in 1982 as the Bears' head coach would eventually put Walter on a Super Bowl contender for the first time in his career.
I believe in a multiple offense, if that's what you're asking. I believe in using different sets. I believe in using some movements. If we're going to give them a football team, it's going to be a winning football team, it's going to be an interesting football team, and it's going to be a football team that everybody can be very proud of.
Mike brought a lot of discipline to the team, and he really shaped up everybody and said, look, you know, we're going to do it this way, and we have one goal, and the goal is to get to the Super Bowl.
Under Ditka, Payton was still the Bears' primary weapon, but the diversified attack kept opposing defenses from keying on him completely. Ditka also sought new uses for his star player. Payton concentrated on his blocking and receiving as much as he did on carrying the ball. He even worked daily on passing, just in case. Sure enough, when injuries left the Bears without a healthy quarterback, Ditka turned to Payton out of sheer desperation. Fortunately, the move was temporary.
It was fun to watch him. I mean, you know, people say, well, I was a coach of the Bears, but I didn't coach Walter. God coached Walter. I think that's what a football player is supposed to do. I don't care how great a running back you are. To be as valuable as you can be your football team, you have to do the other things. You have to protect your quarterback. You have to block for the other running back. You have to be able to do the other things.
For the Bears, it was the perfect marriage between player and coach.
There was a mutual respect, and it was kind of a quiet, out of the limelight friendship. He could talk to Walter. He could talk at Walter. Walter could talk at him. When it was over, they'd go out with one common cause.
It was very hard not to become friends with Walter. Even though, you know, I was the coach, he was the player. I think he made friends very easily. He made you want to be his friend. It was his disposition, the way he lived, and the way he carried himself.
Walter had earned league-wide respect, but still longed for a shot at a Super Bowl title.
Biography's look at Walter Payton will continue in a moment.
Ditka had turned the Bears into contenders. Payton's family had blossomed as well, becoming the focus of Walter's off-the-field life.
You can only take the football stuff so far, and I think my dad was the person to play football, be in the pads, but when he got off the field, the pads and everything stayed on the football field. I didn't play football all my life. I played soccer at the age of 3. You know, everybody used to come up to me and say, is your dad mad at you? Is your dad don't like the fact you play soccer? And I would say, no, my dad respects me for what I do and the choices that I make. He didn't want to always be known as being Walter Payton, the famous football player. He wanted to be known as Walter Payton, the nice person.
The Paytons built a new home in suburban Barrington, Illinois. which gave the family plenty of privacy while still granting accessibility to Walter's fans.
The sign in the gate came about around the same time because people would just take the liberty of just driving up here with boxes of football and pictures or just wanting an autograph. They would not think anything about the time, the day, or anything.
Hello, Walter. How are you? Nice to meet you, man. Pleasure's all mine.
Ah, okay.
Who's that?
It's my son, Simon.
Hi, Simon. How are you?
Yeah. Can you sign his ball for him?
Be glad to.
I think Walter felt, you know, these were fans, and even if he didn't feel like it, he couldn't disappoint them, or he wouldn't disappoint them, so he would do it.
Walter's dedication to his fans included sponsoring toy drives and participating in numerous children's charities.
That's why people feel the way they feel about him today, because a lot of people wouldn't have taken the time. But like I said, whether he wanted to or not, you would never know. He would do it.
When did you start thinking you had a chance to beat Jim Brown's rushing record?
When I first started playing football.
By 1984, Payton neared Jim Brown's all-time rushing record of 12,312 yards. More importantly, the Bears had become winners. But the joy of finally being part of a contender was tempered by an unrelenting press corps.
Every once in a while, my son asks me what game am I going to break it in. But
What do you tell him?
I told him wait till the press conference on Wednesday.
On October 7th, 1984, Brown's record was within reach.
Here we go. McMahon asks for quiet. Second play of the second half of the 21-yard line. Walter needs 2 to break the record. Wide to the left. Here's Galt. McKinnon lines up wing to the right. High formation. Quick pitch to Walter. Looking for the record. Cuts back. He's got it. He's got it with a 25 to the 26-yard line. Walter Payton becomes the National Football League all-time leading rusher, surpassing Jim Brown on his second carry here in the second half. And that's the equivalent to Hank Aaron breaking Babe Ruth's all-time home run record.
It was one of those golden moments in sports where, you know, everybody, people who were there will remember it for the rest of their lives, and people who watched it on television are probably able to tell you what they did that day.
Walter truly was the man of the hour.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you, and give my best to Nancy. The motivating drive for me has been for the athletes that have tried, but yet and still have failed to reach that certain achievement. And also the athletes that didn't get an opportunity to, like the Overstreets and the Delaney's and the Brian Piccolos. You know, this simplifies what the game is made of. And what I did out there today is a reflection of those guys.
In 1985, the Chicago Bears were the best team in football. Payton's consistency was paired with a dominating defense, and the new monsters of the Midway enjoyed all the trappings of success in the media age.
I like Wheaties because they're just like running backs, crispy when you crunch them.
I like Wheaties because they're just like linemen. They got no sweetness.
But Payton still hungered for the only honor that had eluded him in his pro career.
He thought that the mark of most great athletes is they had that ring. And like most great athletes, that drives them. Regardless of how many yards, how many times he led the league in rushing, man of the year, didn't matter. There wasn't a ring on the finger.
On January 26, 1986, the Bears finally reached the Super Bowl. But in a game Payton had spent a lifetime preparing for, his performance fell short of his expectations.
You've played 11 years, and you haven't even come close to getting to this game, and all of a sudden, you know, the greatest running back ever, you know, has this monumental opportunity to do something huge. And I think that he probably put a lot more pressure on himself than he would in a normal game situation.
The New England Patriots set out to stop Walter Payton and held him to just 61 rushing yards and no touchdowns.
They knew that we didn't have a whole lot of offensive weapons. We were built around being a running game, and Walter Payton, you know, it was all set up with the run. So they thought if they could stop the run, that they would take away our offense, and it didn't matter. They couldn't score against our defense anyways.
For Payton, the ecstasy of being part of a champion was lessened by his failure to fulfill the personal goal of scoring a Super Bowl touchdown.
He had high goals and high expectations for himself and for everyone else around him. We did make it to the Super Bowl. Not getting the touchdown was a huge disappointment to him personally. But the game got away so quickly from us.
It didn't even dawn on me when the final score was 46-10. I didn't know who scored, or why they scored, or how they scored. I just know we won a football game. And I think, you know, to be the greatest football player that I've ever seen and not to have a touchdown in that game probably hurt a little bit.
When a scoring play was called for defensive lineman William the Refrigerator Perry, Payton took it as an insult to the Bears' backfield.
When we walked up to the line, my attitude and my demeanor was lackluster because I was devastated. Once the play started, when the play started, all I did was stand up and then just walk to the sideline. I didn't even move out of my position. I just stood up and just walked to the sideline because it was a disappointing feeling at that moment.
Payton continued to add to his rushing record, boosting it to over 16,000 yards. But in 1987, a 33-year-old Payton shared playing time with young Neil Anderson. The writing was on the wall, and after 13 seasons, he decided to retire from pro football. On January 10, 1988, in a playoff loss to the Washington Redskins, Walter Payton played his last game. His final moments on the field became a monument to his desire.
I remember him sitting on the bench with his head in his hands. And after I saw that, I enjoyed every day because of that picture in the paper of Walter like this. You know, everybody's gone out of the stands. We're all in the locker room taking a shower, and Walter's still sitting there like this. That's how much he loved it.
For Payton, life after football would bring greater challenges than anyone could have imagined. Payton walked away from pro football in early 1988 at the age of 33. He received the game's highest honor 6 years later.
We welcome you to the front steps of the Pro Football Hall of Fame as we are about to enshrine 5 more greats in this, our 31st annual enshrinement ceremony. Today, a young man has the unique distinction of being the first son to present his father for a Hall of Fame enshrinement. Presenting Walter Payton for induction is Walter's 12-year-old son. Welcome, Jarrett Payton.
He originally wanted Jim Finks to do it, and then Jim was ill. And then it was like, okay, who am I going to let to do this? And you had all these people that were just wanting to do it. They didn't want to say anything, but they were all hoping to get the opportunity to do it. And then he just said, you know what, I'm going to have Jarrett do it.
And once I found out it was me, I almost lost it because I was so scared.
I'm trying to get this thing over with.
He didn't want to do it because he had to put on a suit. It wasn't cool for boys to wear suits.
Not only is my dad an exceptional athlete, he's a role model. He's my biggest role model and best friend. We made a wager who would be the first one to break down in tears. And after hearing my son get up here and talk, I don't care if I lose the bet.
In retirement, Payton sat on the Bears' board of directors, but kept his eye on his ultimate goal.
He wanted to be the first minority owner of an NFL franchise, and that drove him just as much as being the best run in the National Football League.
When I look at people, I don't look at colors. I look at people that I can work with or people what they are. And that's why I like for people to look at me, not for being black. Even though I'm black, you know, I had nothing to do with that. I'm black and I'm proud of it. I'm here because I have something to offer.
He really believed and felt that this was going to happen.
Despite being advised against aligning with a singular applicant for expansion, Walter kept a previous commitment to his St. Louis partners. But when factions developed within the ownership group, the partnership dissolved, and Walter's dream ended in failure.
You know, I think it really disappointed him that it didn't work out for whatever reason. because, you know, in the times that I did talk to him, he was really excited about, you know, making it happen. And he's like, you know me, I'm going to make it happen some way or another. And I'm sure that that hurt him.
Reeling from his setback, Payton turned his focus away from football and toward a new passion, auto racing.
He, from the time he could drive, he drove fast. It was something about the need for speed.
And I absolutely despised it because I didn't understand it. It didn't make sense to me.
Well, I used to go with him to a couple of races, and one in particular, when he had his accident, actually, I was with him at that race. And I remember a guy coming up and saying, someone just got into a really bad accident, and actually, I think it was your dad. I didn't flat out ask him to stop racing, but I think he saw how shook up we all were after that accident and knew that he wasn't going to risk that again.
Walter was a guy who was never going to be as happy as he was playing football. He could be happy and he could be enjoy what was going on, but I know that he could never find that complete solace that he truly wanted.
I wanted him to just be happy. You know, be thankful for what you've accomplished. And what's the problem? There shouldn't be a problem as far as I was concerned.
But there was a problem. Feeling lost away from football, Walter sank into a deep depression. And in 1994, he separated from Connie and filed for divorce.
Yes, the separation came, but I think, you know what, it was good. I think it gave both of us time to grow and to learn and to realize how much we really did care about each other.
By 1995, Walter had reconciled with Connie and made his family his top priority. But by 1998, Walter began to lose weight. It was evident something was wrong.
When I saw him, I kind of knew that there was something there he wasn't telling us. I said, man, you need to see the doctor. I didn't know he'd already seen the doctor, and he was kind of waiting on the results.
Walter was diagnosed with primary sclerosing cholangitis, a rare liver disorder that would require a transplant.
He was very calm. I mean, didn't seem frightened. Just sat me down and said, you know, I'm going to tell you as much as I know. I don't know that much, but I have the doctor's number. He said, we can call him. He'll explain to you, you know, let you know what needs to happen, but I'm going to be fine. I just need a liver transplant, and there's no doubt that I won't get this transplant within 2 years, and I'll be back to normal. It'll be okay.
I just remember being so scared and worried, but the way he presented it to us, the way he told us he was so strong and so confident that he was going to beat it and that not to worry, and just having him with that positive attitude helped me get through that.
Walter kept his illness private, but made a public appearance when Jared announced he would play football at the University of Miami.
More things to worry about than I did. He's 6'2", 200 and some odd pounds, 4'3", 40. And,
but for friends and fans, Payton's gaunt appearance was shocking.
I said, this really doesn't look right. I hadn't seen him for a long time, and I said, he's sick.
He was such a private and proud person. He didn't want to burden us with what he was going through.
Rumors began to circulate about Payton's health, and 4 days later, Walter held another press conference.
This is frightening. What? Are you scared over this?
Am I scared? Hell yeah, I'm scared. Would you be scared? But what can you do? You know, like I said, it's not in my hands anymore. It's in God's hands.
I think once he made the announcement, I think a lot of pressure was taken off because now he was free to go about and do what he needed to do. He didn't have to worry about people looking at you and wondering what's wrong.
To the people that really care about me, just continue to pray. And for those who are going to say what they want to say, may God be with you also.
Walter kept a brave face and made several public appearances to promote organ donation. But within weeks, cancerous tumors were found in his bile duct. Any hopes of recovery quickly faded.
Of course, that was the worst that we could ever hear. We didn't expect that and didn't want to hear it. But again, we never gave up hope. He never gave up hope. He just said, fine, okay, what do we need to do now?
He was a fighter, and he fought everything. And knowing that he had no control over this was his biggest issue, not having control over the situation, but also had to put it in God's hands and let him kind of take over.
Walter Payton died on November 1st, 1999. A few days later, fans, friends, and family celebrated his life at Chicago's Soldier Field.
I got a little girl, she's 4 years old. 10 years from now, when she asks me about the Chicago Bears, I'll tell her about a championship, and I'll tell her about great teams, and great teammates, and great coaches, and how great it was to be a part of it. But the first thing I tell her about is Walter Payton.
I think what sticks with me more than anything was the outpouring of love that I felt from the people that were there. I mean, all his former teammates were there. The present Bears were there. The Hallis family, the McCaskey family were there. The dignitaries was there. But when you looked up into those stands and you saw the people with the signs, the pictures, I mean, it was a genuine appreciation. It was as close to love as you could get.
Let me give you some advice from someone who's kind of stood in his shadow for a number of years. Don't measure what you do against what Walter did. Try to do it better than anyone else has ever done it, and Walter will be proud of you.
When I'm through playing football, I want to be known as a player that whenever he was out there on the field, every play, he gave everything that he had. And when he left the field, he left everything that he had in him on the field. He also had a personality too, and he had emotion and feelings for the people that were around him. That means more to me than number 34 or 2,000 yards or 500 touchdowns or 2,000 receptions. You know, being known as a person who really cared.
Well, I think your legacy is the life you lead. I mean, it's what you leave behind for your family, for your fans, for the sports, for the game you played. I think you leave a better legacy than he left.
He was flesh and blood and human. He was not a god. He was a man with a talent and a skill. He was not a perfect man. He was a good example.
All I could see was his smiling face and some of the jokes he played on people. I mean, I never looked at, you know, the way he looked at the end. I looked at the way he was jumping over people and running into people and bouncing off the ground. And that's what I remember about Walter Payton.
In retirement, Walter Payton became a good luck charm to a Chicago area high school basketball team he helped coach. When the team advanced to the championship game, Walter couldn't attend, but entrusted a player with his Super Bowl ring for luck. In the post-game frenzy, the ring was lost until this past year when it miraculously turned up. Many football fans believe that Walter Payton is much like that ring. We may not see him, but he'll always be with us. Tomorrow on Biography, NFL Greats Week continues with Vince.
Team that has defied all odds.